Hey guys, Brian here with Better Chess Training, and in today's video, we are going to have a little bit of defensive tactics training. And what I'd like you to do is take a look at this position, and it's black to play, and I want you to find the best continuation for black. Okay, take some time with this. Take 15-20 minutes, and maybe on a notebook or a piece of paper, write down all of your variations and ideas. And I guess I just encourage you to try to think as deeply as possible. Try to identify the problems in the position and come up with some candidates and analyze those candidates as fully as you need to make a conclusion. And then you can compare your analysis to mine after the video. Okay, I hope you've had some time to have some thoughtful analysis and wrote down um, all of your variations and your thoughts. So let's go into this. Um, the first thing to note here is that White is threatening checkmate here on f8 with rook to f8. So let me just make a move here. This is not one of our variations, but basically anything that doesn't stop this checkmate can be eliminated very quickly. So with that in mind, we have to see what the ideas are here. Basically, this queen is protecting or is attacking f8 as well as this rook. So finding a way to protect this knight or to block this connection here, because we have two attackers and just one defender and the king, is what all of our um, candidates should do. And there is one candidate that does sort of an in-between move, and that's rook to e1 check. So we should examine that as well to see if there's any um, positive results from that. So immediately we can see that the the knight here cannot be protected by another piece as the way the position is right now. So our main thought would be, how can we block this queen from attacking? Okay, or give the king room to escape. So those would be the two ideas here. And so the candidates that came to my mind, and I think it's all the candidates, which you can see if there's any others. Let me know in the comments if I missed one. Would be queen to e7. Okay, um, rook to e7. So that would be blocking the queen here. Okay, and then another one would be king to d8, which would give us a little room so that if the rook takes f8, well, we could block with our rook or with our queen, which might not be a good idea. Um, Other candidates here would be something like queen to c8, because that gives the king an escape square on d7, as well as pinning the queen. And rook to e1 check. So this doesn't prevent the checkmate, but it is a forcing move, and so we should take a look at that and see if there's any follow-up or any merit to that move as well. So that would be, I guess, the first part of my thought process would be to identify the candidates that you want to examine to see what the best move is. So let's go on and we'll start examining the candidates and do some calculation. Okay, let's examine the candidates here. Just a quick thought on this. When it comes to your thought process, there is different philosophies as to what um, order you should examine the candidates. I think it's something here that um, I don't want to, I guess, don't put yourself in a box. I think sometimes our mind is going to wander in different areas and look at different ideas when it comes to our calculation and our thought process. What I'm trying to do here is just identify, I guess, the minimal steps that you would need to calculate this fully. What I mean is, I'm not so worried about which, if I'm going to calculate the rook to e7 candidate first, or I'm going to look at the rook to e1 check candidate first. Um, Unless there's something that you think you're going to be able to eliminate quickly, you might just want to confirm it. So, but what I am going to do here is examine the incorrect moves first and see how we can eliminate them and how far we need to look to eliminate them, and then move to the correct solution, and because there's a little deeper analysis there. So let's take a look at the first one. and that would be king to d8. And here, the idea here is that if rook to f8 check, that we would be able to block with our rook. Okay. The problem with this is, well, there's a few problems. It's quite simply, we can either just increase the pressure with something like rook to h8. There's also moves like rook to d6 here, pinning the queen, and then after rook takes f8, um, rook takes d7 check, and then king takes d7. Then we have queen takes d5 check with a slight advantage for white. That might not have been the best continuation, but we could see that it's not great. Actually, let's go back and try to find what the best move would be. So after rook to e8, I think we can go with rook takes e8 check, and then we have two options: king to h, or takes e8, falls to rook to h8 mate, and queen takes e8, also falls to actually a bunch of moves, but the simplest is probably rook to d6 check. And if something like king to e7, then rook to a6 check actually will lead to mate. I did some analysis on this, but at the very least, you're going to win some material there. So king to d8, let's go back to that move. We can reject that pretty quickly. Okay, let's look at queen to e7. And the idea here, of course, again, is blocking this queen. And here we have some of our basic tactics here. Queen to c6 check. And then here, if we play king to d8, then rook to d6 check is just going to either lose material or probably lead to mate. Okay? If we block here with the queen, then queen takes a8 check, just picks up some material here. Queen to d8 check, and take a look here. What's the best move? Now, if you take the best move here is rook takes f8 check. Okay, because after king takes f8, then we win the queen with queen takes d8 check. Okay, and again that'll lead to probably to mate in a few moves. Okay, so actually it I believe no, it I was going to say if king to g7, then queen to h8 is mate, but rook to e8 can be played here. But again, there's a lot of options, including rook to h8 check. So again, going back to queen to e7, we see that this is not a good candidate either. So let's look at queen to c8 here. And the idea here is to pin this queen, okay? And also give the king an escape route. Well, after rook takes f8 check, okay, king to d7 is forced. Of course, we can win the queen right away. But there is a more forcing option here, and that is rook to d8 check. And after king to e7, again forced, we have rook to c6 check. Okay. And after king to d7, again this is forced, we have queen to d8 mate. Okay, so just to go back here real quick, this rook to c6 check blocks the queen, and frees this queen from the pin. And so after king to d7, we have the queen to d6 mate. Okay, so queen to c8, this candidate we can eliminate as well. And now we just have two more candidates. We're going to quickly look at rook to e1 check. Okay, and here the analysis is a little tricky, but we can actually shortcut some of it. After king to d2, we find that this rook is attacked, and we have to back this rook up anyway. Now, that may not mean that it's not the best move, but the problem here is that white has a um, tactical continuation that is pretty forced. And the move here is queen to b6. And this seems like a hard move to consider, but we have to look at, there is a tactical pattern here of, I'm just going to show you real quick what happens. If, for example, black were to make a move like rook to c8, which looks good because it's getting on the c file, then we have a checkmating pattern with rook takes f8 check, king takes f8, rook to h8 check, king to g7, which is forced, and then finally queen to h6 mate. Okay, and this is a checkmating pattern that is good to learn. And if you notice that, which you should have, if you would have, because one of the things when you're calculating, you always have to consider your opponent's most forcing moves. In this case, the this rook takes f8 check, and we can see that this king is cut off from the second rank here. Now, why is this better, say, than... So why does this eliminate rook to e1 check? So even without seeing queen to b6, what we'll note here is that after king to d2, rook to e7, and then queen to b6, the problem, even if we were to do a move like rook to e6, which seems to give a little more freedom here and eliminates that checkmating pattern, white can just go back to his original threat. And then if we go back to block, well, we have this rook to h8, which we'll actually see in another variation. And there's no way for black to defend against this, okay, without losing a lot of material, and or without a checkmate, okay. So let's go back. So rook to e1 check seems like it might be okay, but there's a little problem with it. Okay. Okay. This brings us to our final candidate, which is the correct move, which is rook to e7. Now, the key here is that we needed to find black's or white's best follow-up, or at least his most forcing follow-up, and that would be rook h to h8. And this renews the mating threat on f8. Okay. And now, if you found this move, this is you get a gold star. Okay, and that's queen to e6. Okay, why is queen to e6 the best? Well, we have, again, just looking back here, and we're going to go through this a little quicker. We need to give our king a place to escape, and there's a few ways to do this, but this one is the best way. For example, we tried something like queen to c7. It quickly fails to rook takes f8 check, king to d7, and then after we trade queens, queen takes c7 check, king takes c7, then white is simply up a rook with rook takes a8 and should be able to win pretty easily. Okay, after queen to e6, the other way to find this is that we have to look for our threats here and our counterattack, okay, with queen to e1 check. So that is the idea here, is to now find some counterplay against white's king. The way to evaluate this position is that even though right at this moment, this f8 knight is, we have to consider that it's basically gone. So we can't look at that when we're calculating our advantages or disadvantages. So material is pretty even. So we're really not necessarily looking for a win. We're looking for a way to survive, because white does have the initiative here. So after queen to e6, white has a couple options, and I'm going to look at first at rook takes f8 check. Okay, after king to d7, rook takes a8. Then black actually wins. After queen to e1 check, king to c2, rook to e2 check. Okay, so this is all forced. King to d3, and hopefully, if you saw this in your initial analysis, you can commend yourself. Queen to d2 mate. Okay, so after queen to e6, rook takes f8 check actually loses. But white has a better move, which was actually played in the game. Queen to b5 check. Okay? And from here, there's two main options, maybe three main options. Um, Actually, two main options, because queen to d7, of course, leads to mate in 1. So now we're looking at rook to d7. And the problem here is that after rook takes f8, king to e7, now note now we don't have that queen coming in here. Um, Queen c5 check, okay? And this loses fairly quickly here because um, after, say, king to f8, trying to run away, we have rook to h6 check, which wins the queen. King to g7, and then rook takes e6. Okay? Going back here, if instead we try to block with rook to d6, then we have rook takes a8. And here it's, we have queen to e1 check, king to c2, queen to, let's say, e2 check, okay, king to b1. And now if we try to check again with queen to e1 check, we have queen to c1, which stops any thoughts of perpetual check. Okay? So here after, let's see, let's go back here. So that rook to d7 is not the best move. Besides that, those analysis, we could also see, we remember we want that rook to come in here to try to, for that mating pattern. Okay, so the best move here for black is king to d8. So that might have been a little hard to find. And after rook takes f8 check, king to c7, here we see moves like queen to c5 check, which was played in the game, king to d7, and queen to b5 check, queen to c7, queen to c5 check, led to a draw. Now, why couldn't we do anything else here? Besides queen to c5 check, if we tried to take this, rook takes a8, then we have queen to e1 check, king to c2, and then rook to e2 check. And then if we don't want to have that mating pattern, remember, with king to d3, with mate, then the white queen has to sacrifice herself here. And so now we have two rooks against a queen, about even, and it would be very difficult for either side to demonstrate an advantage here. Okay, so just to finish off the game, I just want to show you the main line, and then without all of the extra variations, just so that you can see that. And maybe if you actually saw this as the main line or the main concept, then that's very impressive, and you can commend yourself for that. Okay, so here again we are mate is threatened, so we have to block with rook to e7. By the way, this game is from Hochstrasser versus Ziaditnov in the Bern Open in Switzerland in 1994. If you want to look that up, and I'll put that in the notes as well. So we have to defend here with rook to e7, and then white has his next threat here with rook h to h8. And we need to create counter threats with queen to e7. And remember, white can't take this knight. Taking this knight is actually a losing move, so he goes queen to b5 check. And we have to make the tough to find, but the best move, king to d8. Rook takes f8 check, king to c7. And as we saw earlier, taking the rook on a8 leads to a draw, or a drawn position. So queen to c5 check, king to d7, and white chooses to repeat the position, queen to b5 check, king to c7, queen to c5 check, and then a draw was agreed, or maybe it was claimed with a threefold repetition. I hope you enjoyed this analysis and training exercise. I hope you tried the best that you could. And a couple quick notes is uh, don't feel bad if you weren't able to find all of the variations. I wasn't able to either, and it's not necessary to maybe have seen every single thing when you played Rook to E7. However, I did want to go into some depth because it's a very rich position, and it's very important to see a lot of the forcing lines to make sure that you're not walking into a trap or into a lost position here. So hopefully you enjoyed this. I wanted to find something a little bit different. Um, a lot of times with our tactical problems, they are move and win type problems. I wanted to find something that was a draw, defensive position that led to a draw. So fighting for that draw, because sometimes we have to do that in our games, find ways to find counterplay. So hopefully that was helpful for you. And if you enjoyed it, let me know in the comments, and I'll try to look for more interesting positions in future videos. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. It was a little tougher of a position to analyze. The first move maybe wasn't the hardest to find, but the follow-up analysis I found very challenging. So I hope you did as well, and I hope you enjoyed that challenge. If you enjoyed it, press the like button. Let me know in the comments what you thought. And if you haven't done so already, subscribe so you can find out about future videos. Have a great day, and I'll talk to you soon.